Animals don't get too hung up on reason. They just keep killing.
In a Violent Nature is a 2024 Canadian slasher horror movie, written and directed by Chris Nash. It stars Ryan Barrett, Andrea Pavlovic, and Charlotte Cregan. The film follows a mute killer who targets a group of teenagers in the Ontario wilderness, with the events largely observed through the killer's point of view. So normally when I review a movie, I either do a video right after seeing it as soon as I get home, or pretty early the next day. This is a rare situation where I saw it almost 2 full days ago, but I just couldn't shoot a review because I had such mixed feelings on it. Because on one hand, there are things that make this a must see, and then in other ways, this movie's kind of a dud and fairly disappointing, I think, to a lot of people who are looking for the next Friday the 13th. Which, let's be honest, I mean, this is basically a Friday the 13th. You have a mute killer walking around in the wilderness, killing teenagers. You know, yeah, it's from his perspective, but other than that, I mean, it's basically a Friday the 13th. I mean, if we had a Friday the 13th movie coming out every year like we did back in the 80s, I highly doubt a movie like this would even exist. But with that being said, I'm not trying to hate on this movie at all. So let's start off with the things I enjoyed about this. The things I really enjoyed were the kills, man. The kills are incredible in this. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. There is one kill in particular that is one of the best kills ever. I mean, from any slasher or any horror movie period, this kill is up there. Beyond that, the other kills are also brutal, savage, gory, definitely don't hold back, and there's a lot of creativity in them as well. I also really dig the way this killer looks. He looks big and imposing and definitely scary. And I mean, some people will be mixed on his mask, and I get that. It is a weird looking, kind of a little bit silly kind of mask. But as the movie goes on, I think that mask becomes more and more intimidating, beyond the fact that you just don't see it a lot. Most of this movie is shot from just like right over the killer's shoulder, kind of like you would see in a video game. And then also the way this movie looks, it is gorgeous. The cinematography, the camera angles, the creativity and the way it's shot in general, I think it's just a beautifully, extremely well shot movie. And from what I could tell, all the special effects in this are done practically, and it really shows because they're beautiful to look at if you're a fan of horror. But that's kind of where my positives end, because first off, the acting is just really, really not good in this. I'm not trying to hate on anyone, but you can see the inexperience on all of this cast. Like, they just do not translate on camera. They don't feel real. They don't feel believable. Their dialogue doesn't feel real. Their dialogue isn't believable. And beyond that, it's just kind of pointless. Like, this is not a well-written movie. There isn't almost any story to it, and the story that is there is very thin and not even as intriguing and interesting as, like, say, a Friday the 13th, which those movies didn't have much story either. But I don't think a movie like this has to have a phenomenal story. As long as it's creepy and eerie and you have this killer going around killing people, that's kind of what we're here for, right? But the problem here is there's no suspense at all. A huge chunk of this movie is shot in the day. And even though it's gorgeous to look at, you know, the wilderness and everything, it's just a beautiful movie, but it doesn't lend itself to eeriness when everything is just kind of in broad daylight and you're just clearly seeing this killer from the very beginning of this movie to the end. There isn't that suspense in, you know, not getting a great look at him or whatever. And then they don't build suspense either because you're following the killer. And so you know when every kill's coming. There isn't a lot of surprises really because of that as well. And then it moves incredibly slow. It feels like an art house movie in the slow burn way that it's shot. And that may work in something that is more of a think piece and artistic, and there is a story to it, and it's building this dread because of this story and characters. But when you're talking about a movie that basically has no characters, basically has no story, and it's mostly in the daytime, and then it also moves extremely slow, there's no anxiety built, there's no dread built, there's no anything that's even remotely scary built with it. And even though I did enjoy some of the things, and I could kind of see where they were going for, like, for instance, there are some times where a kill goes on way longer than you expect it to. It's very drawn out. I like the idea behind that. It could be very cool because you're building this, you know, this dread and just like this uncomfortability, but it doesn't work here. And I can't even exactly tell you why. I think it's just because through the whole movie, you're so comfortable with this killer that even when he's doing these horrible things, yeah, it's gross to look at. Yeah, it might make you wince, but that's about it. There's nothing really scary or dread-filled about it. So there's basically just these huge, long stretches of this movie where you're just watching this killer walk through the woods. And that's it. And like I said, it's beautifully shot. But we're watching a horror movie, guys. Like, there's nothing suspenseful, nothing scary, nothing moving along a story. You're just sitting there for long stretches, and I mean minutes at a time, where he's just walking through the woods. Then there's so many things that just don't make sense. Lots of holes in the story, things that just don't make sense in any sort of common sense level either. Like, this killer is loud as hell when he's walking through the woods, and he'll be right up on someone and they don't notice he's there, or things like that. And you're going, what? You know, like, how would they not know he's right there? There's, like I said, no suspense built. And then there's also stuff that just doesn't make sense. No one really reacts that way. No one talks that way. No one does these things. And so once again, it takes you out of the movie. And there's some things that I just really, really disliked about it. The ending especially. It doesn't make sense. I don't know why they did this. And I mean, it doesn't make sense as in not like it's confusing, but it's just like, what? What was the point of that? Are you trying to pad runtime? Like, what was the idea behind what they do at the ending of this? And I don't want to spoil it, so I'm not going to say here, but when you see this, you'll know what I'm talking about. You're just going to be like, what was that for? What was the point of the last 10, 15 minutes of this movie about? And so it's just tough to talk about this movie. And that's why it took me so long to make this review, because I'm just so mixed on it. Because I don't want to say to you guys, don't see this, because I think there are definitely some game changer level things done in this that I think you definitely need to see as a fan of horror. Like I said, there are a couple kills in this that are just fantastic. And there are some moments in this where you get these flashbacks to a Friday the 13th, but yet on a more badass, brutal, 2024 level of gore and intensity and aggression. And then I also think it is a cool idea to follow the killer. I do think, though, that you can't focus on that through the entire movie. You need to have sections where you get to know these characters and at least somewhat care about them, as well as things like maybe you're following the killer right up to the point where he's near the house, but then it cuts to the people inside. And so for a little bit, you're not sure where he's gonna come out at. Yeah, he's there, but there's some suspense built there. Things like that this just doesn't have when you're following the killer the entire thing. And there are even a few parts where it does cut away from the killer, and those don't make a lot of sense either, because you're basically sitting there with these teenagers listening to a bunch of pointless dialogue that doesn't really tell you anything about who they are. It doesn't tell you much story. It's just pointless. I mean, yes, there are some moments where they do, tell you this backstory of this killer and things like that. But there are definitely other times where you're hearing other conversations or other things are happening. You're not following the killer and they just don't make sense. You're just like, why would I care about whatever's happening right here? In a lot of ways, it kind of reminded me of a video game, a third-person video game, when you don't know how the controls work yet. So you can't really look where you want to look. Things are happening where you want to know where they're happening. There's other times you're seeing things you don't care about because you're trying to focus on something else, but you just don't know how to control it yet. Yeah, there are moments like that in this that just, it feels that way. It feels confusing. It feels annoying. You feel frustrated because, yeah, you're following this killer that you can't control, that is doing things that you don't want him to do, but you're following the killer. You're not interacting in any way. You're not a part of this movie in any way. You're not pulled in to this movie for any reason because of that. But once again, I don't want to completely hate on this because I cannot stress to you enough how good some of these kills are, how good the movie looks, how really badass this killer is, and some of his kills, the way he looks when he's doing it, just the things that you really want to see in a slasher movie, a lot of it is done right. So I do think there are things we could learn from this. I do think that these filmmakers and everyone involved in this did do something special. There is a lot of good here. It's just unfortunate because it could have been, you know, like a classic. I mean, this movie, if everything was as good as the kills and as good as the way it was shot and as good as the way the killer looks, if those elements, everything else was at that level, this would be a classic. This would literally be an all-time slasher. But unfortunately, it doesn't do those things. So it's just not going to be one, I think, that we remember for a long time. But it doesn't mean it's not going to be entertaining. So I'm not saying don't go out and see this in theaters. You know, if you're looking to see a horror movie in theaters and you want to see what this is all about, it definitely is badass on the big screen because of how impactful these kills are, and to be able to have seen those and be in the conversation, I think is worth it. But if you're not dying to see what the buzz about this movie is about, then I think you could definitely wait until it's streaming somewhere, because I think you'll still enjoy it. The things about it, you'll enjoy it just as much at home. Either way, it's not a bad movie. I was entertained. I do think in general, I enjoyed this movie. It's just not one that's amazing, that's a must-see, or anything like that. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for checking this out. If you enjoyed it, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ding that little bell, because that is the best way to keep track of this channel. And when I post videos like this, and I post videos like this every week, I also want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys mean so much to me. And if you would like to help support this channel over on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. Or you can become a channel member by clicking on that join button down there, and that helps out the channel a ton as well. But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button, and remember guys, horror can be fun. And if you enjoyed this, click right here to watch me review another movie. And I'll see you guys next time.